The winter morning was cold and silent when a crowd gathered to witness the end of a woman whose beauty had once enchanted the Russian court. In the center of the square stood a wooden scaffold, stark against the pale sky, and on it waited Maria Hamilton, the favorite of the Tsar and once the pride of the imperial court. People pressed together, murmuring in low voices, unsure if they had come to see justice or tragedy. The young woman was not an ordinary criminal, nor was she a forgotten servant. She was known for her elegance, her charm, and her closeness to the most powerful man in Russia. Yet, on this day she stood alone, condemned by the very world that had once lifted her up. Her silk gown contrasted with the rough boards of the platform, and her proud posture betrayed neither fear nor weakness, even as her fate became inevitable. Those in the crowd struggled to reconcile the image before them with the stories they had heard of her life inside gilded halls. Some whispered that she was guilty of betrayal and cruelty. Others pitied her as a victim of passion and circumstance. The executioner sharpened his blade nearby, its sound cutting through the hush like a chilling reminder that no rank or beauty could save her. At that moment, the figure of the Tsar appeared, towering and stern, his presence confirming the seriousness of what was about to take place. The people gasped, for it was rare to see a sovereign watch the death of a woman who had once been dear to him. Yet Peter stood resolute, signaling to all that even his own emotions could not stand above the judgment of the law. Maria lifted her gaze and locked eyes with the man who had once adored her. In that brief exchange, the weight of power and the fragility of human ties became painfully clear. She did not cry out, nor did she plead for mercy. Instead, she carried herself with a dignity that stunned even those who believed she deserved her punishment. The square seemed frozen in time, as if all of Russia held its breath to witness not only a sentence carried out, but a drama that revealed the ruthless nature of power. For some, this moment was a warning that passion and ambition often lead to destruction. For others, it was a scene of unbearable cruelty in which love had turned into a spectacle of death. The scaffold became more than a place of punishment. It was a stage on which human weakness and imperial authority collided in full view of the people. Children clutched the hands of their parents, women whispered prayers, and soldiers kept order while their eyes betrayed discomfort. When Maria finally knelt, her long hair falling forward, silence spread like a wave through the multitude. The sound of steel striking wood soon followed, sealing her fate forever. The crowd shuddered, realizing they had witnessed not just the death of a woman, but the end of a story that began with beauty and favor and ended in blood and sorrow. The image of her final moment lingered in the minds of all who were present, and for years afterward, her name carried with it the weight of mystery and dread. In that instant, the tale of Maria Hamilton ceased to be a private scandal and became part of the collective memory of a nation, reminding everyone that even those who live closest to the throne can be brought low by the unforgiving hand of destiny. The story of Maria Hamilton cannot be understood without tracing the roots of her family back to a distant land far from the Russian court where she would one day rise and fall. Generations before her time, during the turbulent reign of Ivan the Terrible, a group of Scottish nobles crossed the seas and entered the service of the Russian Tsar, offering their loyalty and their military skill in exchange for a new beginning. Among these foreigners was the Hamilton line, which steadily adapted to the language, customs, and traditions of their adopted home. By the early 18th century, this once foreign name had become woven into the fabric of Russian nobility, though its owners always carried with them a trace of their distant origin. Their presence at court was a reminder of how Russia had long drawn talent and ambition from abroad, shaping outsiders into loyal servants of the empire. Maria was born into this environment, inheriting not only the proud heritage of a noble clan, but also the expectations that came with it. She grew up hearing tales of valor and loyalty, stories of her ancestors who had exchanged their native highlands for the sprawling lands of Muscovy. Those stories imbued her with a sense of destiny, convincing her that her path lay in the shining halls of power rather than in a quiet provincial life. The Hamiltons were not the wealthiest family, yet they possessed connections that granted Maria access to circles where influence and opportunity intertwined. She was educated in refinement and manners, qualities that prepared her for the delicate role of serving in the imperial household. Her Scottish ancestry lent an air of exoticism that distinguished her from many other young women of her time. Courtiers whispered of her unusual beauty, blending foreign grace with Russian confidence, and this combination made her stand out in gatherings where every gesture and every glance mattered. At a time when noble families sought favor by offering their daughters as companions to empresses and ladies-in-waiting, Maria represented both pedigree and promise. The tradition of bringing young women of noble but not excessively powerful families into the inner circle was a carefully crafted strategy of the court, ensuring loyalty while avoiding the danger of rival dynasties. The Hamiltons fit this role perfectly, and Maria embodied their chance to secure prominence through charm and service. The shadow of her ancestry lingered behind her every step, for people often remembered that her bloodline was both Russian and foreign. This dual identity gave her a kind of magnetism, suggesting that she was destined for a life that would not be ordinary. Her arrival at court was therefore not a sudden accident, but rather the continuation of a journey begun many decades earlier when her forefathers pledged themselves to Moscow. Every noble gathering, every whisper in gilded corridors, carried hints of how history and heritage had shaped her presence. For Maria herself, the knowledge of her family's past was both a burden and a source of pride. She knew that expectations surrounded her, that her path had been smoothed by ancestors who fought, negotiated, and endured to secure a place in Russian society. The name Hamilton might once have been alien, but by her time it carried with it a weight that opened doors and drew attention. Thus, when she stepped into the brilliant but perilous sphere of imperial service, she did so not as a nameless figure, but as the heir of a long legacy that bound the distant Scottish Highlands with the grandeur of St. Petersburg. This legacy was her foundation, a silent companion that gave her confidence to walk into a world of power, intrigue, and danger, where her destiny would unfold with breathtaking speed. In the year 1713, the Russian court glimmered with the grandeur of imperial ambition, and into this vibrant world stepped Maria Hamilton, a young woman whose presence would not go unnoticed. Her entrance into the service of Empress Catherine was both a privilege and a challenge, for life at court was a theater of constant observation, where every smile, every glance, and every whispered remark carried weight. Maria, with her striking appearance and finely honed manners, immediately drew attention among the circle of ladies who surrounded the Empress. Her beauty was remarked upon by noblemen and courtiers alike, but it was not only her outward charm that distinguished her. She possessed a quick intelligence and an ability to read the mood of a room, adjusting her demeanor to win favor and admiration. These qualities soon placed her among the most talked about of the young companions who moved through the polished corridors of St. Petersburg. The atmosphere she entered was one of glittering ceremonies, sumptuous banquets, and endless intrigues, a place where ambition could elevate a person to splendor or cast them into ruin with equal speed. Maria's youth and freshness contrasted with the worldliness of some of her peers, making her a figure of fascination. For her family, her presence in the imperial household was a triumph, a visible sign that the Hamilton name remained close to the beating heart of Russian power. For Maria herself, it was the fulfillment of dreams formed in childhood, when she heard stories of court life as a dazzling stage where beauty and cleverness might open paths to fortune. She observed carefully the behavior of older ladies who had mastered the delicate art of balancing duty and influence, learning the silent codes that governed proximity to the Empress. The grand halls of the palace echoed with music and laughter, but beneath the polished surface there were rivalries, jealousies, and whispered secrets. Maria navigated this environment with a mixture of innocence and boldness, eager to enjoy the admiration she received, but also aware that favor was fragile. The men of the court admired her elegance, while women viewed her with suspicion, for her rise seemed too rapid to be ignored. At gatherings, she shone like a jewel, her youth casting a light that drew eyes even when she remained silent. Behind her poised exterior, however, lay an awareness that her position depended not only on her charm but also on her ability to remain useful and pleasing to those above her. Every gesture at court was a performance, every conversation a chance to build alliances or create enemies. Maria thrived in this setting, finding excitement in the whirl of attention and the constant possibility of advancement. The court of Catherine was known for its blend of splendor and volatility, and Maria's presence there added another spark to its restless energy. Each day brought new opportunities and dangers, yet she embraced them with confidence. Her laughter was remembered by those who attended the evening gatherings, her graceful steps noted during processions, and her elegance whispered about long after events ended. In this glittering world, she was no longer simply the daughter of a noble family with foreign roots, but a figure whose beauty and charm turned her into a living ornament of the Empress's household. For a time, the promise of greatness seemed to surround her like a luminous aura, and few could have imagined how swiftly that brightness would fade into shadow. Peter the Great was a ruler whose gaze carried both the weight of authority and the fire of insatiable curiosity. And when it fell upon Maria Hamilton, the course of her life shifted in an instant. The Tsar was known for his restless energy, his passion for reform, and his equally fervent appetite for companionship, and Maria's arrival at court stirred within him a spark of desire. She was young, radiant, and unlike the seasoned women who often surrounded him, and her foreign lineage only added to her allure. To Maria, the attention of the sovereign was both intoxicating and perilous, for his favor could lift her above rivals, yet also expose her to jealousy and scrutiny. Whispers began to circle through the corridors of the palace, as courtiers noticed the way the Tsar's eyes lingered on her during ceremonies and dinners. Maria responded not with resistance, but with a subtle grace that encouraged his interest, allowing their connection to grow quietly, yet unmistakably. For her, it was the culmination of dreams of significance, a moment when her beauty and charm seemed to have unlocked the very heart of power. For him, it was another chapter in a long story of passionate encounters, yet one tinged with freshness and intrigue. Their meetings, though never fully recorded, were imagined by contemporaries as moments of secret intimacy behind gilded doors, where the sovereign shed the armor of command and revealed his human desires. Maria entered these encounters with both eagerness and caution, aware that every gesture might secure her position or hasten her downfall. The favor of Peter brought her gifts, attention, and the admiration of those who envied her proximity to the throne. To walk beside him, to share his gaze, was to bask in a light that dazzled all who beheld it. Yet such radiance carried its own dangers, for in the volatile world of the Russian court, envy sharpened like a blade. Some muttered that her rise was too sudden, others feared her influence, while a few admired her courage in embracing the dangerous affection of the Tsar. Maria, however, could not turn away from the tide that swept her forward. The thrill of being chosen by the most powerful man in the empire eclipsed doubts, and she surrendered herself to the current of passion and ambition. Peter was not a man of gentle moderation, and his intensity left its mark on those he drew close. In Maria's case, the spark of their bond illuminated her path for a season, casting her in a glow that made her one of the most remarkable figures of Catherine's court. But those who observed with experienced eyes knew that such favor was never permanent. They had seen others rise and fall, and they understood that the flame of Peter's desire could burn brightly but rarely endured. Maria, entranced by her sudden elevation, either ignored or dismissed such warnings, savoring each moment as though it were proof that destiny had singled her out. The empire's ruler had noticed her, had chosen her, and in that choice, her fate became entwined with his in ways neither of them could yet foresee. In that decisive glance, in that sudden affection, lay the seed of triumph and tragedy, a seed that would grow swiftly and eventually lead her toward a destiny darker than any glitter the court could provide. For a time, Maria Hamilton lived as if she had stepped into a dream spun from silk and gold, for the favor of Peter the Great opened doors that others could only admire from a distance. She was adorned with jewels that sparkled under candlelight, her gowns of fine fabric marking her as a woman who had risen above the ordinary confines of noble life. At banquets, her place near the sovereign ensured that her presence was noticed, and the laughter she shared with him added to her growing aura of enchantment. The palace itself became her stage, each hall echoing with music, each gathering offering her an opportunity to bask in admiration. Servants hurried to meet her needs, Companions flattered her, and her peers studied her carefully, hoping to learn how she maintained her position. The rhythm of her life was filled with grand processions, evenings of music, and whispered conversations in hidden alcoves. With every passing week, she grew more accustomed to the richness that surrounded her, to the certainty that she belonged in this dazzling world. The grandeur of St. Petersburg reflected itself in her, amplifying her confidence and feeding her sense of security. The sovereign's attention ensured that gifts flowed to her, not only jewels and gowns, but also privileges that placed her above many others at court. She could command respect by a glance, and her wishes were often granted before they were spoken aloud. For Maria, this was intoxicating, for she had dreamed of greatness, and now she walked within it. Her family, too, shared in her elevation, proud that their daughter had gained the admiration of the emperor himself. Yet beneath the glow of chandeliers and the shimmer of gold, there was an undercurrent of tension. Those who envied her whispered that such fortune could not last, that her place was fragile, no matter how radiant it appeared. Still, she brushed aside doubts, telling herself that her beauty and her cleverness would keep her in the light. She embraced the pleasures offered to her, enjoying the rare wines, the delicate feasts, the carefully staged spectacles of court life. Musicians played to delight her ears, poets sought to capture her grace in verses, and artists tried to preserve her likeness on canvas. Every indulgence seemed proof that she had been chosen for a life beyond the ordinary, a life in which fate smiled upon her. Nights in candlelit chambers were followed by mornings in sunlit gardens, and the rhythm of privilege lulled her into believing it was permanent. Yet those who had seen others rise and fall knew the court was a place where fortune could vanish overnight. Maria, however, did not dwell on shadows. She allowed herself to believe that the joy of today would always flow into tomorrow, that the admiration of the ruler and the treasures he bestowed upon her would never fade. The splendor surrounding her felt eternal, and she surrendered to it completely. In the golden haze of those years, she lived as if nothing could ever interrupt the sweetness of her life, unaware that the same brilliance that elevated her would one day reveal the path to her ruin. The favor that once shone upon Maria Hamilton eventually dimmed, for the passions of Peter the Great were as fierce as they were fleeting, and his restless spirit rarely lingered in one place for long. What had begun as a thrilling connection, a fire that lifted her into a realm of privilege, slowly cooled until the warmth of his attention no longer enveloped her. At court, the change was noticed immediately, though few dared to speak of it openly. No longer did courtiers see the same lingering glances or hear the same laughter that once surrounded her. The sovereign's interests shifted elsewhere, and Maria began to feel the chill of neglect creeping into her days. She still wore fine gowns, but they no longer carried the same meaning when she sensed that eyes no longer followed her every movement. Her place at gatherings felt less secure, and whispers circulated behind her back, suggesting that her time of glory was already fading. For a woman who had once been lifted high by affection and admiration, the silence of indifference was more painful than open hostility. The golden world that had seemed so solid revealed itself to be fragile, dependent not on her own merits, but on the fleeting attention of one man whose will shaped the destiny of all who surrounded him. Maria found herself walking through halls that once radiated joy, but now felt heavy with uncertainty. She began to measure her steps more carefully, to wonder who among her companions now waited for her downfall. Though she still carried herself with elegance, inside she felt the weight of disappointment, the fear of being cast aside in a world where forgotten favorites vanished without trace. Each day became a struggle to maintain the image of confidence, while her heart told her the truth that her influence was waning. The sound of music at banquets no longer thrilled her, for she could not ignore the absence of the sovereign's gaze. The feasts that once seemed like celebrations of her presence now felt like stages where others prepared to replace her. At times, she tried to believe the distance was temporary, that his interest might return, but the longer the silence endured, the harder it became to sustain such hope. The glittering palace began to feel like a gilded prison, a place where she was trapped by memories of a love that no longer existed. In her solitude, she recognized how swiftly fortune could change, how the same path that had raised her up now threatened to abandon her to obscurity. This realization gnawed at her spirit, making her restless and fearful. She sought comfort in conversations with companions, yet their words lacked sincerity. For in the court, sincerity was always rare. What she longed for most was the spark of recognition, the warmth of a smile that once made her feel invincible. But that light was gone. In its absence, she faced the cold truth that beauty and charm alone could not secure permanence in a place ruled by power and desire. The emptiness left by the sovereign's fading affection became the turning point of her story, setting her on a path where longing, desperation, and reckless choices would guide her steps. When the brilliance of imperial affection faded from Maria Hamilton's life, she turned her gaze toward another figure who lingered near the sovereign, yet remained in his shadow, a man named Ivan Orlov, the Tsar's personal attendant. Unlike the towering presence of Peter the Great, Orlov offered a kind of intimacy that was quieter, more approachable, and perhaps more comforting to a woman who had known both splendor and neglect. Their connection did not blossom under chandeliers or during grand ceremonies, but in more modest settings, where the warmth of conversation and the simplicity of companionship replaced the dazzling yet uncertain attention of the ruler. For Maria, who once believed her future secure in the glittering court, the affection of Orlov appeared as both solace and temptation. He was not noble in birth, yet his proximity to power made him more than a mere servant. His presence was constant, his devotion tangible, and his willingness to admire her provided the recognition she so desperately craved. The court soon noticed their closeness, and whispers spread with the speed of wildfire, for nothing escaped the watchful eyes of rivals. Some dismissed the relationship as a fleeting distraction, while others saw it as reckless defiance of the unspoken rules that governed the palace. To Maria, it was more than a diversion. It was a lifeline, a chance to feel desired again after the cold withdrawal of the Tsar. The sincerity of Orlov's attention contrasted with the grandeur of the sovereign's fading passion, and this contrast gave her a sense of control she thought she had lost forever. Yet, in the delicate environment of the imperial household, such an attachment was dangerous. To turn from the ruler to his attendant was to blur the boundaries of loyalty and propriety, and each step she took along this path tightened the noose of scandal around her neck. Still, she pressed forward, choosing to embrace the warmth of Orlov's affection rather than endure the emptiness of solitude. Their meetings carried an intensity born not of opulence, but of secrecy, each glance charged with the thrill of forbidden passion. The very risks involved heightened the allure, making her believe that perhaps fate had opened another door when the first one closed. For a while she convinced herself that this relationship could sustain her, that the admiration of one man could replace the fading glory of another. But shadows always follow such hidden affairs, and the more Maria surrendered to Orlov's devotion, the more she wove herself into a net of vulnerability. The grandeur of her former life began to seem like a memory, and in its place grew a dangerous attachment that would soon entangle her in choices more desperate than she could imagine. The glitter of court life demanded constant display, and for Maria Hamilton, the loss of the Tsar's full favor left her desperate to preserve the illusion of wealth and influence that had once come so easily. Accustomed to jewels that sparkled in the lamplight and gowns woven from the finest fabrics, she could not imagine returning to the obscurity of a life without luxury. The court was a place where appearances meant survival, where a single evening without radiance could reduce a woman to irrelevance. To maintain her place among the ladies of the Empress, Maria began to look for ways to sustain her splendor when her resources grew thin. At first, it was a quiet act. A ring slipped unnoticed into her possession, a small sum of money taken under the pretense of forgetfulness. She convinced herself that such indulgences were harmless, mere adjustments to balance the scales after years of service and sacrifice. Yet what began as small transgressions soon became a pattern, for the hunger to display magnificence before watchful eyes was insatiable. The gowns of other women glittered beside her, the necklaces of rivals gleamed brighter, and Maria felt the pressure of comparison pressing upon her pride. She turned her gaze toward the treasures of Empress Catherine, whose jewels and ornaments filled chests and chambers with brilliance beyond measure. These objects were symbols of power, and to claim them, even in secret, was to borrow a fragment of that authority for herself. Each theft carried both excitement and dread, for the risk of discovery loomed larger with every step. She became adept at hiding her spoils, tucking them away where no servant's hand might reach, where no curious eye might stumble upon them. To those around her, she maintained the image of elegance, but beneath the surface, she lived in a state of constant unease, balancing the desire for grandeur with the terror of exposure. The court, with its endless banquets and ceaseless rivalries, blinded many to her quiet thefts, yet the shadows of suspicion slowly began to gather. Rumors drifted through the corridors, vague at first, then sharper, until whispers linked her name with the unexplained disappearance of precious items. The thrill of possessing jewels that had once adorned the Empress herself gave Maria fleeting satisfaction, but it was accompanied by a gnawing awareness that she was walking a dangerous path. Each glittering gem hidden in her chamber became not only a prize, but also a silent witness to her growing desperation. The dazzling world she longed to preserve had become a trap, and the treasures she claimed in secrecy were chains tightening around her, preparing to drag her toward a fate from which there would be no escape. Behind the shimmering facade that Maria Hamilton worked so tirelessly to maintain lay a secret far darker than any jewel hidden in her chamber, for her affairs with both the Tsar and his attendant Ivan Orlov had brought her not only fleeting passion, but also children whose existence threatened to destroy the fragile life she had built. In the rigid world of the Russian court, where honor and reputation were currency, an unacknowledged child was not simply a private matter, but a scandal that could ruin both mother and father. Maria, terrified of exposure and desperate to preserve the image of grace and control, resorted to acts so grim that even her admirers would recoil when they learned of them. It is said that she concealed her pregnancies with skill born of fear, hiding her condition beneath layers of fabric and feigned illnesses, all while continuing her duties in the Empress's household. When the time came and the infants were born, she confronted the reality of a choice that seemed to her more dangerous than sin itself, and she chose secrecy at the cost of life. The children vanished into silence, their brief existence erased before it could ever be known beyond her private torment. To those who saw her at court, she was still the elegant companion, her smile bright and her posture proud, but within her chambers she carried the weight of decisions that would one day seal her fate. Each disappearance was another stone upon her conscience, another shadow following her through the candlelit corridors. These hidden tragedies remained unknown to the public for a time, yet whispers eventually surfaced, carried by servants and rivals eager to tarnish her image. The horror of such rumors was too heavy to ignore, and once suspicion began to spread, every act of vanity or ambition was reinterpreted as evidence of cruelty. Maria, once admired for her beauty, became the subject of chilling tales that blurred the line between gossip and truth. Her desperate attempts to maintain her glittering facade only made her seem more calculating in the eyes of her accusers. What she had buried in secrecy could not remain hidden forever, and when revelations began to surface, they transformed her from a woman of charm and allure into a figure of dread. The grandeur of her gowns, the sparkle of her jewels, and the poise of her gestures could no longer shield her from the grim knowledge that her darkest choices would be dragged into the light. In the end, it was not only theft or betrayal that doomed her, but also the silent cries of the children she had refused to acknowledge, voices that the court would remember long after her beauty faded from memory. The shimmering veil that had long protected Maria Hamilton finally tore apart when the Empress's jewels were discovered missing, and whispers of murdered infants reached the ears of those in power, forcing the court to act with severity. What had once been murmured in secret now burst forth as accusations, and the splendid halls that had witnessed her triumphs became the stage of her downfall. Servants testified, rivals whispered louder, and evidence was gathered with a precision that left little room for denial. The thefts, once hidden beneath charm and boldness, could no longer be disguised as carelessness, for too many ornaments and coins had vanished from the Empress's chambers. Yet it was not the loss of gold that shocked the judges most deeply, but the grim revelation of the lives cut short, for tales of infants lost in silence carried a horror that no one at court could ignore. Maria was summoned before a tribunal where stern faces studied her with cold detachment stripping away the glamour that had once shielded her. She stood accused not as a lady of elegance, but as a woman who had betrayed the trust of both sovereign and empress, and the severity of her crimes demanded an equally severe response. Witnesses recounted her secret meetings, her vanities, her disappearances during times when she had hidden pregnancies, weaving a portrait of guilt that even her defenders could not undo. Each detail added weight to the charges until the picture was complete and impossible to soften. Her pleas of desperation, if they were offered, fell upon ears deafened by outrage. The court, keen to preserve order and demonstrate that even those closest to the throne were not immune to justice, resolved that she must face the ultimate punishment. The decision was made with grim finality, and the sentence was death. For Maria, it was the moment when her glittering mask shattered completely, and the truth of her fragile existence stood revealed. She who had once glided through banquets in satin and jewels, now awaited the scaffold as the embodiment of betrayal. The judgment was not merely a personal condemnation, but a message to all who served in the imperial household that no amount of beauty, wit, or lineage could shield one from the law. Thus, her fate was sealed by the hands of men who saw in her not only the crimes she committed, but also the warning her example could provide. In that hall where voices had once praised her grace, silence followed the pronouncement of her doom, for the fall of Maria Hamilton was as complete as it was inevitable. When the sentence of death was confirmed, it was not delivered in secrecy but carried into the open with a weight that shook the entire court, for Peter the Great himself chose to sanction the punishment and to stand present on the day when it would be carried out. This decision astonished many, for though the Tsar had been known for his ruthless sense of order, few expected he would expose himself to the sight of a woman he had once cherished kneeling before the executioner. The morning of the event drew an immense crowd, nobles and commoners alike, each eager and fearful to witness what they believed would be a defining spectacle of justice. The scaffold had been erected with deliberate care, its rough wood a stark contrast to the elegance of the palace where Maria had once walked with confidence. As she stepped onto the platform, dressed with dignity despite her fate, silence rippled through the assembly, for even those who despised her crimes could not deny her poise. Peter stood not far from the block, tall and imposing, his gaze fixed on the woman who had shared his bed and his favor, and in that gaze there was neither softness nor pity, but the cold conviction of a ruler determined to show that no heart could outweigh the law. The executioner awaited his command, the blade glinting in the pale light, and the crowd held its breath as time seemed to stretch into eternity. Maria did not cry out, nor did she beg, but carried herself with a composure that startled those who watched, as though she wished to leave behind an image of courage rather than despair. The air itself seemed to tremble as Peter raised his hand, and in that gesture, the fate of his former mistress was sealed. A single motion brought the sword down, and with it, the life of the woman whose beauty and ambition had once illuminated the court. The spectators shuddered, some whispering prayers, others staring in awe at the sheer finality of the moment. The Tsar did not turn away, for he wished all present to understand that justice must remain unshaken, even when it demanded sacrifice from his own heart. To many, the image of Peter watching so intently left a lasting impression, a portrait of a ruler who placed the order of the state above every private tie. To others, it revealed the chilling severity of power when it no longer recognized love, memory, or compassion. The day of Maria Hamilton's execution became a story told and retold, for it embodied both the majesty and the terror of a reign where even the closest companions could fall to the blade of the law. The fall of Maria Hamilton did not end with the sharp strike of the executioner's blade, for her memory lingered like a ghost across the Russian court, whispered in corridors and remembered in the anxious faces of those who had once admired her. Her story became more than a personal tragedy. It grew into a symbol of the perilous balance between privilege and ruin that defined life near the throne. To some, she was painted as a warning, a woman who allowed vanity and reckless choices to lead her into darkness, while to others, she was a victim of a world that demanded perfection, yet punished flaws with merciless severity. Mothers whispered her name to their daughters as they prepared them for courtly life, reminding them that beauty could be both a gift and a curse. Servants who had once glimpsed her brilliance retold the tale in hushed tones, speaking of jewels stolen, children lost, and a ruler who watched her final breath with unwavering eyes. Poets and chroniclers debated whether she deserved pity or condemnation, and her fate became a subject of fascination for generations who searched for meaning in the cruelty of her end. The grandeur of St. Petersburg itself seemed to carry traces of her presence, as though the city's gilded palaces and wide avenues remembered the elegance she once displayed. Yet her legacy was not merely about scandal, for it revealed the unyielding iron beneath the brilliance of the imperial court, where loyalty could be bought, affection could be fleeting, and the law could descend with ruthless impartiality. Those who reflected on her tale found themselves asking whether she was destroyed by her own ambition or by the suffocating expectations of a world that left her no safe path to walk. The image of her dignity in the face of death only deepened the ambiguity, leaving her figure suspended between sinner and martyr. In the end, Maria Hamilton remained a reminder that the Russian court was not simply a stage of splendor, but also a crucible where lives could be shattered with shocking speed. Her fate warned that proximity to power was as dangerous as it was enticing, and that those who rose too high on the fragile wings of favor could find themselves hurled into the abyss without mercy. Thus, her story endured, not as a forgotten scandal, but as a haunting lesson etched into the memory of a nation, proving that even amidst the glitter of empire, the human cost of ambition and desire could not be hidden forever.